Hi, everybody. Welcome back and welcome again to my porch. I'm sitting outside because, again, it's such a beautiful day. I hope all of you are enjoying yourselves, spending time with your families, and getting to enjoy the outdoors. I also hope you're still reading during our break. So, today I'm going to be finishing Sideways Stories from Wayside School. We're going to be hearing the last 3 chapters. So sit back and relax. Chapter 28, Nancy. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Mrs. Jules's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think of it as a girl's name or as a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of a quiet kid with the big hands and feet who sat over there in the corner next to John. Nancy was very quiet and shy. He was ashamed of his name. He had only one friend in class, in school, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for a good reason. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. They just called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain, "you." Nancy was afraid to ask his friend what her name was, because then he might have to tell her his name. He never could figure out why she never asked, but he was happy just to leave it alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up! You're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned very red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg. Get the lead out," said the teacher. "Your name is Mac?" said Nancy. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "My name is Nancy," Nancy called after her. Mac stepped back outside. "I was ashamed to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl's name." "Oh, I think it's cute," said Mac. "I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother has a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy. "That's why she gave me the name." "My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. "Hey, do you want to trade names?" Nancy asked. "Can we?" asked Mac. "I don't see why not," said Nancy. "Okay, let's do it," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times in opposite directions until they were so dizzy that they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy and Nancy was Mac. They said their goodbyes. Then Mac raced up to Mrs. Jules's room. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name's Mac," he announced. "I traded names." He held out his big hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "Glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Nice to see you," said Bebe. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, anybody want to trade names with me?" Jason called out. "I'll trade with you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. "Wait, I'll trade with you, Terrence," said Mauricia. Mauricia didn't like her name. "No, he's already trading with me," said Jason. "I'll trade with you, Mauricia," said Damien. "No, thanks," said Mauricia. "I'll trade with you, Damien," said Mrs. Jules. "No, I want to be Mrs. Jules," said Stephen. It turned out that nobody in Mrs. Jules's class liked his name or her name. The children all spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy that they fell over. And when they stood up again, nobody knew who anybody was. "What are we going to do, Mrs. Jules?" asked Leslie, who was really Eric Bacon. "My name is not Mrs. Jules, it's Mauricia," answered Terrence, who was really Jason. Confusing. "It is not. I'm Mauricia," said Dee Dee, who was actually Joe. "You're both wrong," said Mauricia. "I'm Mrs. Jewls." This went on and on for an hour. At last, they all figured out who the real Rondi was. She was missing her 2 front teeth, remember? After they figured out Rondi, they were able to get Allison pretty easily. And then from there, they got DJ, Damien, and Mrs. Jewls. She was the oldest one in class. Eventually, they figured out who everybody really was. They had some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually, they're still not absolutely sure they got it right. Everybody just decided to keep his or her own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things much easier. Mac and Nancy, however, kept their new names. But when they were together, they still called each other "Hey You," or just plain "You." So that makes me think, do you like your name? Have you ever wanted your name to be something different? Something to think about. By the way, I think all of you have beautiful names. I would not want any of them to change. All right, chapter 29, Stephen. Stephen had green hair. He had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green green leotards. The leotards matched his hair. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jewls' Halloween party. But unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. "Ha ha ha! You sure look stupid," said Jason. Jason was Stephen's best friend. "So do you," said Stephen. "Boy, are you dumb," said Jenny. "Halloween is on Sunday. Today's only Friday." "You're the one who's dumb," said Stephen. "Ha! You'd probably come to school on a Sunday." "Mrs. Jewls said we'd have the party today." Remember when that actually happened and it was Saturday? But none of the other children wore costumes. Only Stephen did. "All right, class," said Mrs. Jewls. "It's time for our Halloween party." "See," said Stephen. Mrs. Jewls gave each child a cookie that looked like an orange, with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stephen and forgot to give him one. Stephen didn't ask for it. He was afraid that she'd laugh at him again. The children all finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. "All right, class," said Mrs. Jewls. "The party is over. Now we have a lot of work to do." Think about our parties at school, and if that's what it's like. Stephen felt like a fool. The party lasted less than a minute. He had to spend the rest of the day wearing his stupid goblin suit. "Look, Stephen's wearing his sister's leotards," laughed Dana. "They're green, just like his hair," said Fatso. Everybody laughed. Remember who? Sorry, I got dogs. Penny. Mrs. Jewls began the arithmetic lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, Penny, stop it. 2 plus 2 equals 5. "That's wrong," Joy shouted. Mrs. Jewls tried again. 2 plus 2 equals 3. That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 and got 43. It was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get 2 plus 2 to equal 4. "I don't understand it. They've always equaled 4 before." Suddenly, she screamed. The chalk turned into a squiggly worm. She dropped it on the floor. Then all the lights went out. The blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long tongue and pointed ears. Who do you think it is? She stepped off the screen and into their classroom. It was the ghost of Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the blackboard. "Trick or treat, you rotten kids," she said. "Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where's Todd?" "Who is that?" asked Mrs. Jewls. "Mrs. Gorf," said Damien. "Who's Mrs. Gorf?" asked Mrs. Jewls. "She was the meanest teacher we ever had," said Rondi. "What happened to her?" asked Mrs. Jewls. Louis ate her, said Jason. Well, I'm not going to allow this, said Mrs. Jewls. Get out of my classroom, Mrs. Gorf, she demanded. It's Halloween, sweet teacher, said Mrs. Gorf. Ghosts can go anywhere they like. I've come for a little class reunion. But it isn't Halloween, said Mrs. Jewls. Halloween is still 2 days away. I know, said Mrs. Gorf, but Halloween falls on a Sunday this year, so we are celebrating it on the Friday before. Stephen leapt up from his seat. See, I was right, he said. Today is the day we celebrate it, the Friday before. Mrs. Gorf just proved it. He ran up to Mrs. Gorf. They all laughed at me and made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up today. But they were the ones who were wrong. You and I are right, Mrs. Gorf. He put his arms around Mrs. Gorf and hugged her. Mrs. Gorf gasped and disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jewls picked up the piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 + 2 = 4. That's good, she said. When 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen. All the children who had laughed at Stephen now called him a hero, but they told him to change out of his stupid costume. So at lunch, Stephen went home, washed up, and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt. Of course, his hair was still green. It always was. All right, the last chapter, chapter 30, Louis. Now, remember, throughout this whole book, we've been hearing from Louis and learning little snippets of him here and there and how the students at Wayside School would have, playful interactions with him at recess. So now it's our turn to finally learn about Louis. Make some predictions right now. Pause it if you want. Think about, what do you think Louis is going to be like? Louis had a red face and a mustache of many colors. He was the yard teacher at Wayside School. Remember, that's kind of like recess. It was his job to see that the children didn't have too much fun at lunch and recess. And if you haven't guessed already, he is the one who wrote this book. Remember the author? Louis Sachar. On June 10th, there was a blizzard. Do you think there are normal? It's June right now. Actually, today is June 17th. But would we normally have a blizzard in June? Just one of the other wacky things. On June 10th, there was a blizzard. Louis was afraid that the children would have too much fun, so nobody was allowed to go outside. Class, said Mrs. Jewls, after you finish your lunch today, come back up to the classroom. You are not allowed to go outside. The children went to the lunchroom. Miss Mush had made tuna surprise. They looked at it and then hurried back up the stairs. There was nothing to do. Now, class, said Mrs. Jewls, I know that you are all bored, but I have a special surprise for you. I hope it's better than the tuna surprise, said Mauricia. Mrs. Jewls continued, Louis is going to come up and entertain us. He will tell us a story. Now I want all of you to be on your best behavior. When Louis walked in, all the children booed. Are you going to tell us a story? Asked Bebe. Yes, I am, said Louis. Well, it better be a good one, Bebe warned. It better be better than the tuna surprise, said Butterfingers. Remember who that was? I thought the tuna surprise was good, said Louis. You'd eat dirt if they put ketchup on it, said Mac. Hey, everybody, be quiet, said Todd. Let him tell the story. Not too loud, Louis, said Sherry. I'm trying to get some sleep over here. So Louis sat in the middle of the room, and all the children gathered around him. Louis began his story. This is a story about a school very much like this one. But before we get started, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. In this school, every classroom is on the same story. Which one? The 18th? asked Jenny. No, said Louis. They're all on the ground. The school is only 1 story high. Shh, not much of a school, laughed Damien. Louis continued on. Now, you might think the children there are strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I told them stories about you, they thought you were strange and silly. Us? The children answered. How are we strange? I'm normal, said Stephen. Aren't I? As normal as I am, Joe assured him. The children at that school must be crazy, said Leslie. Real Lulus, Mauricia agreed. Tell us about them, Louis, Phoebe demanded. Okay, for one thing, Louis said, none of these children have ever been turned into an apple. Pfft, that's silly, said Dee Dee. Everybody's been turned into an apple at some point. It's a part of growing up. Louis continued, dead rats don't walk into classrooms wearing raincoats. What do they wear to school then? Tuxedos? Asked Todd. And the girls never try to sell their toes, Louis added. Well, no wonder, said Leslie, at today's prices. Louis continued, they don't trade names or read upside down. They can't turn mosquito bites into numbers. They don't count the hairs on their heads. The walls don't laugh, and 2 + 2 always equals 4. How horrible, said Damien. That's not the worst of it, said Louis. They have never even tasted Mauricia-flavored ice cream. A hush fell over the classroom. Mrs. Jules, I'm scared, said Allison. Is there really a school like that? Of course not, said Mrs. Jules. Louis was just telling a story. It was a good story, said Leslie. I thought it was stupid. Who do you think said that? Said Kathy. I liked it, said Rondi. It was funny. Mrs. Jules said, Louis, it was very entertaining, but we really don't go much for fairy tales in here. I'm trying to teach my class the truth. That's all right, said Louis. I have to go down to room 29 now and tell them a story. He started out the door. Class, said Mrs. Jules, let's all thank Louis for his wonderful story. Everybody booed. The end. Okay, so a couple of things I want to share with you. You'll notice on the cover there is a sticker here, Wayside School on TV. Watch Wayside School on TV. So from YouTube, if you just search Sideways Stories from Wayside School, you'll probably find other people reading the book out loud, but there also is a cartoon. So you can watch different episodes and you can see these characters from the book come to life in the cartoon episodes. They're pretty funny. In the classroom, a lot of times I would like to play those during like indoor recess. So check it out. Also, that book that I read you is the first book of a 3-book series by Louis Sachar. So book number 1 is what we just read. Book number 2 is called Wayside School is Falling Down. And this one is just a continuation of all of the crazy things that happen. You get to find out more about Miss Mush, the lunch lady, and Ron, and a little bit more about Mauricia and Calvin. So it's just more wacky stories. And then the third story is Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger. So again, you find more about other students. You get to learn a little bit more about Mrs. Jules in this one. So if you're interested, you can probably find these other 2 books at your library, like at the Reynoldsburg Library. I checked on Get Epic, and the first book is on Get Epic, but these other 2 aren't. So check out YouTube, check out your library. If anything else in the fall, come see me. You're welcome to borrow these. I'll have these back in their classroom. So keep reading, keep enjoying your time at home. I miss all of you so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Thanks for listening.